Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We resume the ETS World Championships. We're now on day 3. 3 players have gone home, 4 players have punched their ticket directly into the top 8, and 9 players remain to fight it out over 4 slots into the top 8 today. So, a real quick refresher on the format of this event. Last weekend, we had a full round robin, all 16 players facing off against each other. The top 4 players of the round robin rounds all directly advanced to day 4. The bottom 4 then faced off against each other in a single elimination bracket, eliminating 3 of them. So the guaranteed top 4 are Sunnyvale and Kamado. They both went 11-4 in the round robin bracket. And Visarius and Tobo. They both went 9-6 in the round robin bracket. Then the bottom 4 were Loco Pojo, Kampfkrot, Love Up, and Moosh, with Moosh taking the win through the single elimination bracket to make it to today. So today, day 3, we have another round robin. The top 4 advance to day 4. The bottom 5 go home. And then tomorrow we have an 8-player double elimination bracket with winner taking $1,000. As you see, we have our prize pool listed here. It's a $3,000 prize pool paid out through the top 8. First place takes $1,000. Second place takes $750. Third place takes $500. Fourth takes $250. Fifth and sixth both take $150. And seventh and eighth both take home $100. And so, joining me here for the pre-show analysis, we have from Team Seek Power Gaming, Team SPG, Bradykin.
Hi, thanks for inviting me back today.
No problem. If you can't be in the tournament, being in the casting booth or the analysis booth is the next best thing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting experience watching the tournament from this perspective. I was hoping to make it in through play, but I scrubbed out a little too hard.
There may have been an incident with a bird that contributed. It happens.
We don't need to go into that. Let's move on right now.
Indeed. So I mentioned earlier some of the results of the round robin, but I will read off the entirety of the results. So, like I said earlier, we had Kamado and Sunnyvale both taking 11-4. Kamado won the tiebreaker match versus Sunnyvale, and we use head-to-head tiebreakers as our level 1 tiebreaker. So Kamado took first in the round robin with Sunnyvale, went second. Tobo, Visarius, and Sir Rhino all took 9-6, but Tobo beat both Visarius and Sir Rhino, and Visarius had beaten Sir Rhino during the round robin, putting Tobo and Visarius directly into day 4, while Sir Rhino now has to fight it out in the round robin bracket today. Then Child Roland, Angry Chicken, Toth, Ilya K, and Unearthly all took 8-7. They didn't quite make it in the top 8, but they were all safe from the bottom 4. Then Hythar, Lights Out Ace, and Kampfkrot were at 7-8, and unfortunately for Kampf, 7-8 was barely into the bottom 4, and he had the worst tiebreakers out of Hythar, Lights Out Ace, and himself. So then Kampfkrot, Loco Pojo at 5-10, Love Up at 3-12, and Moosh at 2-13 were in the bottom 4. And so they had to face off against each other in a single elimination bracket, and Loco Pojo, Love Up, and Kampfkrot did not make it out of that bracket. Moosh, despite his 2-13 performance in the first round robin, advances to the second round robin. Although, looking at the records of his teammates, Tobo and Visarius, who they were all playing the same deck. There were a couple of tech choices here and there between the 3 of them. I don't think it is fair to Moosh to expect a similar record in today's round robin.
Hopefully not. He's definitely a strong player, and he has the potential to do far, far better than that. We can't put too much stock into what happens in a single day of performance, and he showed that he was able to pull himself back together to survive through day 2. So I expect we'll see a better performance today.
Yeah, rallying to save himself at the end of the day hopefully gives him the momentum to have much better results in the second round robin. So speaking of the results of the first round robin, let's take a look at how the aReNGee Eternal staff and our guest casters predicted the top 4 would break out. So as you can see, just about everyone predicted at least one person would, just one of the people that they predicted would make it into the top 4. Although Paradox maybe had a little bit too much faith in his teammates and didn't actually predict someone in the top 4. As another fellow member of Seek Power Gaming, Bradykin, what are your thoughts on your teammates' performances?
Okay, well, I'm not going to bash my teammates too much. Too much. I'll bash them a little bit. So I think they all did fine day 1. None of them had a spectacular run, but we are looking at the field of the best players out there. So it's very, very hard and impressive to have the kind of spectacular run that, say, Kamado and Sunnyvale did. I more want to comment on how we all suck at predicting, because as I was looking at this, I realized, had we been picking at random, we would have had equal, or in Paradox's case, better results. That's the bashing of my teammate. I'm done now. But yeah, it's hard to predict a field like this when these are the best players. Nobody knows what everyone else is going to bring. There's so much uncertainty. And of course, we aren't playing that many games, so variance can play into it. But we did not do a great job.
Yeah, Twitch, or not, well, I would say Twitch chat, but really it was the straw poll fan vote. So Twitch chat, the folks that read our articles and click through the link, the people in the Discord. But the collective group managed to predict about as well as any one of us. So does that speak well of the audience that watches our tournament, or does that speak poorly of us?
To be honest, I think it speaks mostly to it's hard to predict these kinds of things, and any predictions we make, including the ones we'll show later in this pre-show, are kind of a shot in the dark.
Of course. So let's take a look at the overall team performances. Really, the story here is Team ET, Team Eternal Titans, has actually put, so far, 4 of their 5 players into the top 4. You look at Team ET's grouping here, and you're like, wait, that's just the top 4 and then Moosh. And so, really, Moosh is under the gun to make top 8 just so he can even out to his teammates.
Yeah, I honestly had not noticed that. That is very interesting. So yeah, Team ET definitely had a spectacular days 1 and 2. Everyone else's results average out to roughly the same thing. SPG and aReNGee Eternal lost a player, but if you look at the win rate, loss rates, they average out to being similar. Yeah. But Team ET is a clear front runner right now.
And then Team O&D is Team 8 and 7. Everyone they brought 8 and 7, just barely above average. Unfortunately, I don't think barely above average will be good enough going into today. There may be one person at 4-4 who gets into the top 8 on breakers. But depending on how the bracket plays out, likely 5 and 3 is where you should start feeling a little safe. And even then, 5-3 in theory could have one person in on breakers and the other out.
Yeah, although if they end up all clustering at 4 and 4, that will mess up that math entirely. So you never know. But
I ran a set of predictions where we had 5 people at 4 and 4. I really hope that doesn't happen.
That sounds horrifying. That sounds absolutely horrifying. But yeah, chances are they won't all cluster in the same way. That's just random chance. But the salient detail there is that they all performed fairly consistently. None of them had a terrible run. None of them had a great run. So hopefully they'll be able to improve on that a little bit. But they didn't do too bad in day one for sure. And then SVG, unfortunately, we had to say goodbye to Kampf on day 2 as he lost the breakers, but we all also clustered around that middle mark.
Yeah. I did want to bring up one more point about our predictions for the first round robin bracket. Unearthly was predicted by 5 out of 7 to make it to the top 4. And while he was fairly close, 8 and 7 was really one win away from being in contention for tiebreakers. He didn't make it, and he was one of the fan favorites, one of the prediction favorites for the event. He's playing Argenport midrange, which is the deck he has become recently known for. That's ever since Tavrod came out, and Tavrod himself kind of acts as another brick wall against aggro decks. It was kind of the final nail in the coffin for Unearthly to put away the Deep Forge plates for a hot minute. But looking at this field, how do you think Unearthly may have done if he decided to bring Rakano?
I think he could have been far more successful if he had either brought Rakano or iterated a bit more on the traditional Argenport model. As we all know, recently, before this tournament, Bartholo was nerfed. Now, Bartholo was a key part of that deck, and Unearthly seems to have gone for the approach of remove him and leave the rest of the shell intact. I don't want to say bad things about Unearthly. He's one of my favorite people in the scene, but I think that might have been a poor choice. I don't think the deck works as well under the same model without Bartholo. So I think he needed to change some more things up in his deck building. He could have gone back to Rakano, and I think he would have done excellently with that. Or he could have changed the formula of Argenport a bit more. And I think he would have found more success.
Okay. Now, fair enough to Unearthly. All of the players have been saying that they found the field for this event to be very difficult to predict. And some of them have been saying that they think the actual meta prediction and deck building choices were maybe the most important part of this event in terms of success. So I really can't blame Unearthly for slightly mispredicting the field. There was way more aggro than a lot of people predicted.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true. I'm not so much referring to predicting the field in this case, though, more that I'm not convinced that the deck Unearthly brought is very cohesive. I tried playing some games of it myself, and this is not my personal deck style, so it's possible I was underutilizing it, but it just felt like it was so hard to finish out games without Bartholo against virtually anything. I do agree with your point about the field being hard to predict. There's so many different factors in trying to track the individual deck choices of specific players. There's always the what is Team ET going to bring, because they seem to keep bringing these team decks, and sometimes other teams will do so to a lesser extent. So I agree with your point about the meta being very hard to predict. I just wanted to say that wasn't really what I was referring to with Unearthly's deck. Okay.
So let's go into a breakdown of how things are going to break out for week 2 for today and tomorrow. This is kind of a reiteration of what we have discussed earlier. So today we are having a 9-round round robin. So that is Sir Rhino, Child Roland, Angry Chicken, Toth 201, Ilya K, Unearthly, Hythar, Lights Out Ace, and Moosh. They are the remaining 9 players that have not either directly punched their ticket directly to the top 8, those players being Kamado, Sunnyvale, Tobo, and Sarius, or the players who, and they're also not the players who got eliminated last Sunday. Those 3 are Loco Pojo, Love Up, and Kampf Kroat. You can see the single elimination bracket we used to trim those 4 down to the last remaining player who survived, which was Moosh. And so, Bradykin, we have a slightly different, the field is now slightly different for week 2's round robin. We are missing Kampfkrot, Sunnyvale, 2 of the aggro decks. We're missing Lokopoja, who's on a different type of aggro deck, although Hoover Flyers, is not the same type of aggression as either Sunnyvale's deck or Kampf's deck. And we're also missing 2 of the TJP players. Well, 2 of the TJP Cambrai Party style midrange and 1, say, more Elysian Fatties TJP midrange style deck. So how do you think that affects the remaining field? It's kind of slowed down a little bit, you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to have a major impact. This is most of the aggressive players of the tournament who are not playing today for one reason or another. So I think we can expect the games today to be much slower on average, and the decks that were not teched against aggro, such as Angry Chickens, to be much more successful. That's why, in my predictions, I put him very highly, because I think he does much better in this field than he did in the first weeks. And I think other decks that weren't teched too hard against fighting aggro or were more focused on mid-range or the control styles are going to fare much better today.
Yeah. So as a quick explanation of the graphic on screen, the chart itself was made by Buckwheat, and then I have filled it in with a sort of set of predictions for the second round robin. And it's less predictions and more based on the results of the first round robin. So my initial take on this was I just ported results directly 1-to-1 from the first round robin, because these players have all played each other once before. And again, this is only the results of one best of 3. So a single best of 3 is not always a super great predictor for, a number of best of 3s. The better deck, the better player will win the majority of the time, of course. But card games, variants, etc., etc. You all know the jokes. But my first take on that was you had Moosh at, 2 and 6, and I'm like, well, okay, let's take a look at if we give him the average results of all of the Cambrai Party style TJP midrange decks, the decks that were brought by Moosh himself, Sarius, and Tobo. And so that brought him up actually to 4 and 4. And then I decided to do a similar comparison with Sir Rhino and Lights Out Aces list. Although in their situation, as there was only 2 players, they either went 2-0, 1-1, or 0-2. So for any of the situations where the 2 players split results, I just put in we're uncertain question mark here. So Angry Chicken, going by the previous round robin results, actually makes out the best from this reduction of players in the field.
Yeah, that is unsurprising to me.
So, it definitely is that he's facing 3 less aggro decks. We talked to Angry Chicken a little bit over the span of the week, and he definitely was surprised by the amount of aggro in the field. He said specifically about Cambrai Healer that he didn't feel like they would not have a high enough impact coming in from the sideboard, despite the fact that they took up 4 whole sideboard slots. Your sideboard is only 15 cards, so putting in a playset of a card is a little bit over a fourth of your total sideboard space.
Yeah, it seems like he took the approach of trying to make himself really good against a large part of the field and accepting a near auto loss against some of the field.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that play out pretty clearly in day 1. But thankfully for him, most of those decks that he had an auto loss against are gone now. So he really just has to fear Ilya, Roland, and to some extent Moosh today.
Yeah. Angry Chicken in the first round robin actually did go 0-3 against TJP. the Cambrai Party style TJP midrange. He did beat Child Roland, but that is, I would say, certainly an upset.
Yeah, I remember talking to Roland after that, and it sounded like the draws just did not go his way at all.
No,
I did
that
not
was
see
a
the game
match
myself.
on stream, and it did not. Yeah, middle of Sunday, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, that game did not go terribly well for him. So of course there will be, there will be a lot of upsets in terms of related to this chart. And so a couple of them that I think are maybe the most likely. We look at Hythar's results, and I really think his result versus specifically some of the more like mid-range style decks, Toth's deck, Unearthly's deck, are maybe kind of two results I would expect to see flip for this. Big Cambrai style decks are usually kind of the king of the pile of slower mid-range decks. While Praxis isn't, Praxis is kind of an aggressive mid-range deck. It doesn't have the explosive openings of like Elysian or Cambrai Party style TJP mid-range. Student on 2 and a False Prince on 3, for example, for Elysian mid-range. Into Titan. Praxis on 1 through 3 kind of wants to set itself up, as it were. It wants to play an Initiative of the Sands if you're running Initiative of the Sands. It wants to play a Power Stone if you're running Power Stones. Its best 3-drop is oftentimes just an Amber Acolyte. Although recently, Champion of Impulse has been showing up more in the deck.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you that Hythar could see dramatically better results than this chart is showing. That's why he's on my predictions. His deck was designed to fight other styles of mid-range through being better at them in late-game value and having the single-target removal to disrupt their plans. So I agree with you that he could do much, much better than the chart is showing right now. Specifically, I think he has a very good shot against both of the Xenon decks.
Yeah, he split 1-1 against the Xenon deck in the first round robin. But that's one of those things where if it went 2-0 or 0-2 either way, it wouldn't be super out of predictions. But I do think that a 1-1 split or 2-0 against them is maybe a little bit more likely, as long as he's on his A game today.
Yeah, I agree.
So Ilya on this chart has 2 and 6. And I don't think that is super fair to Ilya. He is on a deck that has a lot of inherent variance to it. He kind of alludes to this himself in the deck list he submitted. He called his deck, I think it was Load the Guns, Throw the Dice. I'm here to win worlds. And I really think his deck was actually an incredibly good meta call. In a lot of ways, the meta didn't quite pan out as greedy as he hoped, but a lot of the decks are still slightly greedy. They're hedging their bets a little bit towards greed. They didn't go full on, 3-faction pile mid range. We don't see any Dark Heart or Blue Heart or Moist Praxis style decks, depending on how you want to refer to them. But I mean, we do see Hythar on Dark Cambrai. And while Dark Cambrai is a fairly tame 3rd-faction splash, it's not a full real 3-faction deck. It's kind of 2.5. It's still a slightly greedier deck than Big Cambrai stock, in a way. It's splashing for removal, which does help it versus a lot of matchups that are mid-range matchups. But Slay doesn't do anything against Grenadin drones.
Yeah, I agree with you on Ilya K's scenario. Again, this is why he is in my predictions. The meta is, I'd say, actually extremely greedy, just in a slightly different way than on Influence. As we noted in week 1, there are 0 lightning storms in the 16 players that came to this tournament, and there are not
Correct.
very many Combray healers. There are
Correct.
not very many harsh rules. And those are the ways that you really interact with his deck, and they're just not that present.
Well, harsh rule is sometimes a little bit too slow, but yes.
Yeah, it is sometimes too slow, but it's very strong if you have cards beforehand. But a lot of the harsh rule decks don't have the cards beforehand to slow them down enough.
Yes, ideally, harsh rule is kind of the final stabilizing tool after you've played a Temple Scribe and it trades with a 1/1 token. You play a Combray healer, and it eats a Pyro Knight swinging into it that has Rapid Shot put onto it, so it blocks 5 damage, uses a card. Then you stabilize after a harsh rule on 15-ish health. Yeah, harsh rule often on its own isn't enough, but even though Hythar is running harsh rules, he's not running the tools to get him to the harsh rule with a excess of remaining health.
Yeah, the style of removal that Hythar has gone for does not, as you said, work against Ilya at all. Slay is a bad card against Rally Queen. I often would board it out because it's just too tempo inefficient. You're never finding an actually good Slay target. So what you have to do is use it to remove a 1-drop, or sometimes half of a 1-drop if all there is Grenadindrons.
Yeah, the ideal target for a Slay is often a Bandit Queen, but that's after it's had its mini Anthem effect thrown at your face.
Yeah, the banishes work a lot better because they can be used as a combat trick, but he doesn't have that many of those. So that specific matchup, I worry about Hythar a lot in.
I can agree with that, yeah. So when we take a look at Lights Out Ace and Sir Rhino, we see there are a few matches that did go 2-0 to the Xenon Control style deck, and one of those actually is Ilya's deck. The combination of Banish and Ion, even though they are actually not running Blister Sting Wasp, which can often also be a very annoying wall for a deck that doesn't have very many native 3-attack units to get through. But Ion makes it so that, well, you have a Pyro Knight and an Oni Ronin and some Grenadin drones on the board, and your opponent passed with 3 open power. Depending on what your hand is, the right play may just be swing and hope they don't have it, which is not a good place to be in a tournament.
Yeah, the Xenon decks, they definitely have a lot of power through Ion. Ion is just a terrifying card to handle from the perspective of an aggro player. But I think there's another strength they have that is less noticeable, is that they have a lot of interaction on 2. Between being able to either Temple Scribe, which trades with a token, Vera's Favor, kill a token, or annihilate something, they're doing something relevant on turn 2 every single game against the Ilya's deck. And that's not something that most decks can boast.
Right. Yeah, often the best thing to do against a deck like Ilya's is, no matter how good of a play it is, any play on turn 1, 2, 3, 4 that affects the board is the right play. Playing Seek Power into Find the Way or into a favor that is not Vera's Favor usually is putting you in bad shape. But this deck has a lot of 2-cost interaction. You're right. It is also noted that they have Stray into Shadow in the deck, which is almost even. It is even better than Harsh Rule against this style of deck because you aren't guaranteedly killing your own blockers.
Yeah, the more I'm looking at their list, the more I'm actually liking this specific matchup. Because they have the powerful 2, which we've established. They have the incredibly powerful 3 slot. The Stray into Shadow is definitely a nice card. But they also have 8 4-drops that are really hard to remove. Ilya isn't running the main board Annihilates that would make that 4-drop slot much weaker. Right. So he has 2 Suffocates for the Stewards, but he has no clean ways of handling those other than trying to get a Rapid Shot through, which can be tricky and slows him down a lot. So the more I look at this matchup, the more it's actually making me feel very confident for the Xenon players today. I came very close to putting both of them in my predictions.
Yeah, if we look at Teehee's predictions, well, his predictions were actually Angry Chicken, Child Roland, and then one of Lights Out, Ace, or Sir Rhino, and Toth if both of them don't make it. But I decided that putting 5 players up there was cheats, so I didn't. And speaking of Toth, however, he's actually a player that I predicted to make it into the top 4 of the second round robin. I think TJP, Counter style TJP midrange kind of gets slightly underneath Toth's deck, and and Praxis doesn't have a great answer for its style of going wide. But all of the go wide decks, aside from Ilya's deck, are now out of this event for today. They either fell out or directly went to the top 4. Sunnyvale's deck, also a very go wide style of Stone Scar. We'll probably talk about his deck a whole lot tomorrow morning. But I actually think Toth has a very good chance against a lot of this field. Even though Praxis midrange usually isn't playing very strong drops on 2 and 3 compared to a time midrange deck, even an Ember Acolyte can block a Pyro Knight or an Oni Ronin. And the buff, air quote buff, the somewhat side grade, I think it's actually a buff for Constructed. The buff of Purify to 2 cost is just throw it at a 1-drop. Even throw it at at the Grenadin token that has the summon effect. Ilya's deck, while not 4 of on Shadowlands Guide, does have a Shadowlands Guide. And so silencing that can prevent Ilya from getting value from his Shadowlands Guide to bring back a second token. And I think against decks like Unearthly's deck or Hythar's deck, he has a fighting chance. I think Hythar is slightly favored in that matchup. But he actually lost 0-2 to the Xenon decks. And so do you think that's just the Xenon decks go slightly too high over Toth's deck? Do you think that it's just a case of he needs to tempo them out, aggro them out, and he can't quite seal the game out? Or do you think that that's just an unfavored matchup for Toth for a different reason?
I think it has to do with the first thing you said about how they'll go over him and their removal against his deck is far more effective than his removal against their deck. Toth was another player that I almost had in my top 4 predictions, although truthfully, the almost was a list of 7 that I was trying to narrow down. So, but the reason he didn't end up going in is because I am worried about him in those Xenon matchups. I think those are extremely unfavored, and I would be very unsurprised if Toth went 0-2 in them again and otherwise did very well, but just barely didn't make it.
Okay. That is definitely a reasonable position to take. The only deck with a repeat in this field is the Xenon control list. And if you're a dog in that matchup, you're kind of putting yourself down to an 0-2 start. Or if you're really favored in the matchup, you're putting yourself up to a 2-0 start in terms of the field. Obviously, upsets happen. Even though Angry Chicken actually went 2-0, 4-0 against Rhino and Ace in the first round robin, if we were to see Angry Chicken drop the series versus either Rhino or Ace, it happens. The Xenon control list does have some ways to fight back if they manage to land a Waystone Infuser on 5 and just constantly warp power off the top of their deck, drawing, only gas for the next handful of turns. If Chicken can't put together his Voda combo immediately, the game can swing into the Xenon control deck's favor. But they don't really have a good answer to the Voda combo itself. They're not running Stand Together. They're not running a lot of silences. They have removal for the pieces of the deck, but they don't have silences as an extra layer of safety against, a Martial Iron Thorn and a Mystic Ascendant on the board. But let's talk about. Sorry, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was about to say something, but it was not a smart thought. Move. You can continue going. I was choking it down.
Sure. Okay. Let's talk about Child Roland's list real quick. His list is very innovative for a Skycrag list. It's based off of Paradox's list from the World Wildcard Tournament. It's running Steelfang Chakram in the main deck as a way to punch through Time Fatties and any other unit that a Skycrag deck has an issue punching through. In the situations where you end up getting to 7 power and ulting Evadius, 7-2 is hard to deal with, especially a 7-2 quick draw. But even just a 7-2 anything really, you can't block it profitably with almost any deck. The most common way to block that, I think, in this tournament would be a Sandstorm Titan with a double activated Obelisk, which requires 8 power in play. Or maybe a Mystic Ascendant that's been activated twice. But if you've activated a Mystic Ascendant twice, things are probably going pretty well for you to begin with. There are a lot of 7 health units in the tournament, but there's not many 8 health units in the game directly.
Yeah, the Chakrams are certainly an interesting innovation. I remember watching Paradox as he was going down the train of thought to creating it. He was of the opinion that Direwolf was trying to hint us to use this card by making it Vadius's ultimate.
Interesting.
And I think he actually is onto something with that. It's the kind of card that's really good in some matchups and really bad in others. And I think most of the matchups it's bad in are not in the field today. So I think the Chakrams are going to look much more impressive today than they did in the first week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can agree with that. Steelfang Chakram is, again, not a great card against go-wide decks. You're kind of trying to match it up against your opponent's one blocker. Whereas, a Grenadin Drone token can chump block a 7-2 all day. With the exception of a Champion of Fury getting a Steelfang Chakram, which if you haven't seen a Steelfang Chakram put onto a Champion of Fury, the turn it hits the board, you have not experienced terror.
Yeah, then put 3 War Crushers on it. That happened to me once when I was helping one of them test. It was truly hellish.
That would be an 11 attack charging unit.
Yes, it was.
With Overwhelm.
Yep.
Dear God. Yeah, it's a very interesting look at the list. We made the comment last week. It's kind of similar to how Rakano was built by Unearthly for the Season 3 Invitational, where he used Egen to face off against Big Combre. And the idea of reusable tools to help your small units get through big units is very interesting. And Paradox may be entirely right that is kind of Direwolf's hint of like, hey, we've given you some of these tools, and maybe some of them have been unfairly ignored, or hey, even maybe fairly ignored, but up until now. I think it's very easy to build a schema in your head of the way of the effectiveness of cards, of the quality of cards, and then have like one small detail of the meta change. There'd be a slight shift, and suddenly cards are a lot better than they would otherwise appear. I think Steelfang Chakram may be one of those situations where, against aggro decks, that card is almost completely dead. So I don't, if you like what you see in Child Roland's list and you want to take that to ladder, maybe don't run as many Steelfang Chakrams.
Yeah, I think he might have run too many for this tournament even. I think 2 might have been a safer number. But it certainly won't translate as well to ladder where there's going to be a lot more aggressive decks on average. But it certainly is going to be a card that's on my radar from now on, because it for so long was just assumed to be a terrible card, and it's not. It has merits. It absolutely does.
Yeah, it was a draft bomb that just didn't quite add up in Constructed.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing what future iterations are doing with it, and maybe to see if it leaves Skycrag and goes into another one of the aggressive formats. Like, I'm wondering if Rakano could potentially make good use of it. It's fighting with Hammer of Might in a slot, which is really hard. But I'm wondering if there's something it could do there, or something that Stone Scar could potentially do.
Well, Rakano doesn't have a lot of great 4-drop units. It did used to run Crown Watch Cavalry for the Armory meta, because it was kind of two bodies. It was kind of a body and a weapon at the same time, similar to Shogun Scepter. Rakano does have very good cards on 4 in terms of Hammer of Might, in terms of playing a 2 and a 2 is its actual usual best use of 4 power. Even better than its actual 4 drops. So Steelfang Chakram, maybe can go into Rakano, but I think it fits better the style of Stone Scar or Skycrag rather than Rakano. Because Rakano, once you're at the point of having 3 plate in your deck, or even 2 plate or whatever, you are certainly still an aggro deck, but you're starting to verge into mid range. And so I think it fits the Rakano style a little bit better for something like Egen to also buff defense on units.
Yeah, the reason I was thinking about it for Rakano is that Rakano would be the best of these 3 archetypes at putting Warcries on it, and Warcries on the Chakram are terrifying, even just one of them. But you are probably right in your conclusion that it has a better home in Skycrag and Stone Scar than it does in Rakano, simply because it's fighting with very powerful 4 and 5 mana equipment already in Rakano.
Steelfang Chakram with Warcry, I have seen that in draft, and that at that point you're just kind of like, oh, well, this game is over.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine a Hammer of Might buff on it right now, because that sounds very terrifying. Also very high rolly, but
yes, you just kind of have to manage to hit an evasive unit with the Steelfang Chakram for something like Rakano, I think would be the situation. But Skycrag and Stone Scar have a little bit more in the way of direct, or a little bit more in the way of evasiveness that matters for Steelfang Chakram, which is to say, Overwhelm may as well be evasion if your opponent can't block the Overwhelm profitably. An 8-2 Champion of Fury swinging at you. Well, maybe they have a spare 2-2 or 2-1 sitting around, but if 8 damage splashes over, mission complete. You've done your job well, little Champion of Fury. Thank you.
Yeah, Champion of Fury is probably actually a lot of the reason that the card works, because the Overwhelm, as you said, is very important, and the ability to charge and use it at instant speed in later turns. It and Vadius are pretty clearly like the really good carriers, and then this version also goes heavier on the larger flyers by incorporating the Cloud Snake carriers. Yeah. So it's very clearly built around the concept of using it, because it even goes back to a card that Paradox tries to cut from every aggro deck in Rakano Outlaw. He often ends up running it, but always hates doing it.
That's a card that I've seen a lot of divisive opinions on, in terms of, does it belong in non-Rakano aggro lists? Where, in Rakano, it's it's kind of the missing link of Warcry in the Warcry chain. You drop Oni Runner on 1, Rakano Outlaw on 2, put a Shogun Scepter onto something on turn 3, put a Hammer of Might on something on turn 4, and every single card you draw off the top of your deck is just huge. You kind of need that momentum, or at least that potential for momentum in Rakano. But I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on that card in non-Rakano aggro decks.
Yeah, I'm not enough of an aggro player to be able to say definitively. Personally, I've always been a fan of Rakano Outlaw, but that's probably because I've never played a deck without Desert Marshals and Temple Scribes, and though it's really good at swinging at those low health creatures. So
yeah, I think from the control player point of view, you definitely have some differing opinions on these cards. I still think Crown Watch Paladin is the most terrifying thing to see on turn 2, unless I happen to have a Temple Scribe in hand. But of course, that is exactly why that card has fallen out of favor. Press F to pay respects for the second point of health on Crown Watch Paladin. Unearthly would appreciate it.
Yeah, I have a friend who used to play, and he came back briefly a while ago, and he has some Rakano PTSD. And when I told him that card got cut because it wasn't powerful enough anymore, he just was lamenting at what hellish deck Rakano must be now. Doesn't have all the facts there, obviously.
Right.
But it was certainly a terrifying card, and seeing it get removed from decks was interesting. Because it's still pretty good, honestly, even with the 1 health. I think it's still functional. The problem is that it's fighting both Rakano Outlaw and Champion of Glory for slots, which it can't really win that argument.
Yeah, it used to be that the deck would run all 12 of its available 3 play sets of the cards at the 2-drop slot. But yeah, Crown Watch Paladin just doesn't quite hold weight anymore.
Yeah, and that's the card I should have referenced. Yeah, the card I should have referenced is that Tinker Overseer is what kicked it out.
Yes. Yeah, but this is a little...
Yeah, we're going off topic a bit.
Field,
There's no Rakano in this tournament.
Unfortunately. So we'll be wrapping this up fairly shortly. We'll be getting into the games very soon. Our first matchup for today is going to actually be Angry Chicken versus Lights Out Ace. We discussed that matchup a decent amount earlier, but do you have any final comments on the matches we'll be seeing today, the field, or our first match of the day, Chicken versus Ace?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch too much of it today because schoolwork is fun, but I definitely think that this is a good matchup. I do think it is Chicken favored, so it'll be interesting to see what goes down. But the only thought I have is to say good luck to all the players today, and I'll check in whenever I can to see what's going on.
All right. Well, once again, thank you, Bradykin, for joining me on the casting or on the analysis booth today, on the analysis desk today. Is there anything you want to say about getting in contact with you, talk about Team SPG or anything like that?
I honestly, nothing's coming to me immediately. So, I don't have anything in particular to say. I guess I'd mention that people should check out our website at seekpowergaming.com. We keep a series of deck lists there. We've been upping our article game, and we are on a hiatus from running our weekday tournaments, but those will begin shortly again. So I had to say that people can check things out there. They can join our Discord or by messaging any of our players, and we're all chatty. So if you have any questions, you can come talk to any of us.
All right. Yeah. To reiterate, you can, if you have any questions for Bradykin directly, you can find him on the Eternal Discord. You can find him on the Seek Power Gaming Discord. He is famous for being one of the best Chalice players in the scene.
Oh yeah, if you need me to notice something immediately, tell KC Bandit to make a post about how Kothon's bad in Chalice. I'll be there immediately. It takes like 5-6 seconds. I'm not kidding. Try it at some point. Choose a random time, have him at me with that message. I'll be there very quickly.
The Bradykin symbol. It's just it's just a Kothon in the sky.
Exactly.
All right. Well, as I said, we will be going into game 1 very soon. Our casters for today will actually be another player from Seek Power Gaming, Paradox, and he'll be joining our very own Loco Pojo. Unfortunately, he fell out of the tournament last weekend, but he was happy to jump into the casting booth today. And so with that, we will be going to a short break, and we'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes. Have a good morning, good evening, etc., everyone, and I hope you all enjoy the show.